Good afternoon, everybody. We'll start. This is an important event. We'll start this important event by giving the floor to AUC President to introduce our distinguished speaker. Then I'll have few remarks about the topic of today. Mr. Richard Rooney.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baghat. Colleagues, friends, Mr. Secretary General, Ambassador Adams, Sir Geoffrey of the UK, Randa Abul Azam of el-Arabiya, an old friend and a veteran journalist of Egypt, Provost, colleagues. It's a very, very special privilege at a couple of levels, I think, for me today and for all of us here. First, institutionally, man walked into the room as an ordinary mortal, not to flatter you, but to state the truth. We have the, I believe, without any debate or question, the senior continuously practicing statesman, not only of Egypt, but of the Arab world, by rank, by title, and just by fact. I had the privilege of knowing the Secretary General when he was the foreign minister, and it was a special time in my life to be back in Egypt as the United States ambassador. I saw many of the events that are described in the forthcoming book, the book that has come out in Arabic and that will be coming out by AUC Press in English in the coming months, I believe early in the new year. I haven't checked that with AUC Press to find the latest date. I have accepted the honor and privilege of composing a foreword for this second volume of the memoirs to come out in English, as I did in the first. Egypt has always played a pivotal role in this part of the world, and therefore it's critically important, I believe, for those of us who care about this part of the world, who care about Egypt, who understand its role, its influence, to understand how Egypt thinks and how Egypt makes its policy. How leading Egyptians perceive their own country and the world and its role in the world. This is a time when great countries in the world are debating what are our roles, whether it's in the UK, where people are talking about Brexit, whether it's in Egypt, where people are debating internally and externally, where are we going? Or the United States of America, where half the country wants to impeach the president and half does not, and we're heading into an election year. And part of that is about America's role in the world. So this volume that will be forthcoming in English will illuminate how the policy making, how the statesmen, the men, it's mostly men in Egypt still, but not always. President el-Sisi has brought 8 women into his cabinet, of whom 4 we count as AUCians. And we have your former colleague and mine, Faisal al-Naga, of course, right next to the president, not an AUCian, but mother of an AUCian. So people are debating where we're going, and this book that will be coming out will provide much of the answer to the kinds of questions and the insight that I had the privilege to gain as a participant watching a great Arab statesman at work representing a great country, as I represented a great country that posed a challenge. We had interesting times together, and we went from a time when both countries were changing and shifting. There had been a great meshing under previous leaders in the United States, and then some of the gears started to grind a little bit during that period, despite the best efforts of the foreign minister of Egypt and the ambassador of the United States at the time, I should say. Nevertheless, Egypt prospered and America prospered. So it's a special privilege to have Secretary General of the Arab League, former Minister, His Excellency Ahmed Abou with us. I feel privileged to be able to call you a friend. I feel proud to be able to call you a mentor, actually, someone I've learned very much from in the practice of state. Thank you so much for honoring us today. We all look forward to your return to this campus or the old campus or both when the English edition comes out of my witness, my testimony, Shahadati. Thank you.
I just want to follow up on what AUC President has said, not by talking very much about the speaker that has been done, but by situating the topic that we are going to deal with today. Ambassador el-Gheit published 2 volumes of his memoirs. The second volume has already been translated by AUC Press, Witness to War and Peace, Egypt, the October War, and beyond. The first volume in Arabic, and as the President has just said, is coming out in November, December. شهادتي السياسة الخارجية المصرية. And our poster has just translated that by my testimony, the making of Egyptian foreign policy. Just want to give you some impressions about that volume. And I have to confess to you that I have to avoid a cliché, saying that this is an important book. Memoirs are always crucial. Memoirs of influential figures are important. Important for the media, for the public, but also for people like us at AUC, students and academics. Without these memoirs, most of our analysis of foreign policy is like guesses and speculation. Memoirs give us the chance to back up what we say and provide credible analysis. I have to say, my testimony, شهادتي, is exceptional in this respect. Exceptional. In the sense that it provides 13 chapters, impressive information. The eternal Arab-Israeli war, Egypt's water problems, and Ethiopia's Renaissance Dam, reform of the UN and the Security Council. And I can go on and on and on. Ambassador el-Gheit will certainly provide some information about that, and the questions will push us toward more. So the cliché about memoirs of influential figures as important is fully justified. But I want to add something rather exceptional in this respect. The memoirs are highly documented, and I think Ambassador el-Gheit had very good assistance. He was just saying to us he had about 7 CDs of documents that allowed him to provide these documents. Something that is exceptional in these memoirs, from time to time, the light aspect, the personal information that is given. The memoirs start by 51 pages about the birth of Ambassador el-Gheit, his family, his father as a pilot, the atmosphere he grew up in, and that is important for my students, groping for a career. Uncertainty and how to find the way out. Discussing with grown-up people, and he has lots of sort of closure about what he wants to do. These are very important recipe for young people. And I'm glad that for the second time in about 8 months, Ambassador el-Gheit has accepted to come the main teaching campus, to talk to AUC faculty and the students, the leaders of the future. Another exceptional thing about these memoirs, the language used. Lots of juicy anecdotes. Relationship with Mubarak. How to find ways to cope with the challenging of making foreign policy and involving an aging and ailing president. Impressive anecdotes and side remarks that you cannot understand Egyptian foreign policy and Arab politics without really knowing about them. The language creates a sort of communication, relationship between the author and the reader. What the French call rapport. And I am sure that this rapport will be very present in the talk that we will have today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Bahgat. And thank you for the invitation, because it is really and truly an invitation that I value very much. And thank you, President Ricciardoni. You referred to our relationship when you were the American ambassador to Egypt and I was the foreign minister of Egypt. He used to call, says, I have a subject of interest that I need to speak to you about. By all means, please drop by. Nahid, she's sitting here. Prepare an appointment to the ambassador. He comes, sometimes tense. He wants to start immediately or to make reference immediately to the subject he wants to deal with. Tell him, wait, let's first sit near to the window. We never had a session, a formal session. It was always an informal setting where I had two chairs very near, overlooking a huge, great window, overlooking the Nile. So we sit and we talk about the Nile, about Egypt, about the United States, about the civil war in the United States, about the American presidents, about the Secretary of States of America, about what I read yesterday in the New York Times, in Washington Post, about, and I spent half an hour, and the tension is released. There is no tension. And then we discussed the issue. And it was a very good relationship. Sadly, he left us and he went to Ankara, didn't you? Very bad of you. Anyhow, imagine someone leaves Cairo to go to Ankara. Even the climate. The weather, I mean, not the climate, the climate. Though I can say the climate too. Anyhow, it is really a very difficult assignment to be asked to speak about, would you please, this book. And it is more difficult when you combine both books together, because you cannot deal with that book, my testimony, without touching on the other one, and the other one without touching on this one. Both books together, they come together. They were published in 1 year, 2013. One in January and one in October. All foreign ministers, whether Egyptian or foreign, the tendency always is that they have to write their memoirs, their books. Since I was 10 years old, in all honesty, I wanted to leave a kind of a print. That was my objective in life, to leave a print. I wanted to be at the beginning a fighter pilot, like my father. And I was very eager to join the military academy and to be a military guy. And so, since I was 10, I was putting hours every day reading about military history, strategy, history of personalities, biographies. Then I failed to be a military officer. And the lesson was, when I failed joining the military academy, or I had to resign from the military academy, that is all written in the book. The idea of surmounting difficulties, that you fail, you stand up, and you continue. So I joined the Egyptian Foreign Service in 1965. So the day I joined was 1st of June 65. As I left in March 2011, it was almost 46 years. So I served the Egyptian state for 46 years. And I felt that there was an obligation to write my experience as a diplomat, as a foreign minister, as someone who read extensively history, in war, in strategy. And at the same time, I was very angry. I was angry because I felt that an injustice was inflicted on the Egyptian foreign policy, Egyptian diplomacy, and how we conducted ourselves for decades and decades, being criticized from people who didn't know. They did not know often a lot of the intricacies of the Egyptian decision-making process or how we made foreign policy. They thought that they knew. Amongst them were lots of ambassadors, foreign ambassadors, and the Egyptian ambassadors too, but they didn't know. And there were writers and journalists and media people and ordinary people, laymen. They didn't know. And they do not know up till this moment how Egyptian foreign policy is planned, is conducted, how operations are done, how we coordinate action. So that anger was translated into extensive writing where I wrote the 2 books. Together they are 1,000 pages. 1,000 pages. I felt that as I participated in, or I saw the humiliation of Egypt in 1967, and Egypt was deeply, deeply humiliated. And then how Egypt regained its pride through waging and conducting the 73 war, and then how we conducted ourselves till 2011. But as I joined the Foreign Service, again comes the idea of leaving a print. So, and that is known, I'm not revealing a secret. When I was 23, 24, 25 years old, I said, well, I'll have a shot at being the foreign minister of Egypt. So I worked hard, and my motto was, you read till you are blind. You work till you die. You marry well, and you pray for God to give you, like Machiavelli used to say, fortuna, fortune. Without fortune, nothing is possible. Fortune makes the ready to achieve what he wants to do. Anyhow, the 2 books were wrote and published. Comes the great American University, Cairo, to decide to publish both of them. One was published in February 2019. This year, February 2019, which is Witness to War and Peace. That was the second one published. But possibly the printing office, the American University, thought that that book is the more appealing one, since it deals with the October War and the Egyptian diplomacy and negotiations with the Israelis and the so-called peace process up till almost 2004. Then they decided to publish the other book, My Testimony. My Testimony has 2 parts. One is the philosophical approach of foreign policy. What is foreign policy for a country like Egypt? What influences Egyptian foreign policy? Why are we behaving so as Egyptians? Why do we not change from this president to that president, from this century to that century? We are constant. And the idea here I write is that Egyptian foreign policy is influenced by three factors, pillars, and then the surrounding smaller elements. The first factor is Egyptian history. Every Egyptian would tell you, we are the soul of the Middle East as Egypt. We are the history of the Middle East. Jesus comes to Egypt. Moses comes to Egypt. Islam comes to Egypt. The Romans come to Egypt. The Greeks come to Egypt. Arabs come to Egypt. So the crucial factor is Egyptian history. Then, what else? And the idea is the Egyptian geography, geopolitics, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, the desert, the Nile, the Delta, Peridot, the gift of the Nile, Western Desert, Eastern Desert, Mediterranean, and we are the rich Delta. So everybody is eager to lay his hand on the Delta. So we defend the Delta. And the third factor always is the Egyptian heritage. What is the responsibility of Egypt in this part of the world? What is Ain Galut? Who knows Ain Galut amongst you? What is Hotain? Who knows about Hotain? The manifestation of Egypt in the region, how to defend Egypt the Christian, Egypt the Muslim. So these are the factors, the philosophical approach to making foreign policy. I ask a question in the book, the early pages of the book. I say, Egypt, the experience of 200 years of Egyptian foreign policy and the Egyptian history since Muhammad Ali, the Great, starting 1805. Why did he ally himself to France and not to Britain? Or Ali Bik Kibir, why did he ally himself to, in a way, Russia and France and not again Britain? Why Gamal Abdel Nasser made the, people would say, the mistake of allying himself to the Soviet Union and not to the great island empire, the United States? Why do we usually tend to ally ourselves to the land power of the age and not to the naval power of the age, whether Britain or United States? So the philosophical approach is there in the first chapter. It is not, the first chapter is not my upbringing. It is the philosophical approach to foreign policy. Then the second chapter deals how did I prepare myself? How did I engage in a manner to be a good Egyptian diplomat, to serve my country, and if called upon to be the foreign minister, to conduct myself and to perform the way that is expected from an Egyptian foreign minister. Third and most interesting chapter, which I advise everybody to read thoroughly, is how Egyptian foreign policy and Egyptian diplomacy is conducted. Who makes foreign policy in Egypt? Is it the foreign minister? Is it the prime minister? Is it the president? Is it the foreign ministry itself? Is it the general intelligence? Is it the security apparatuses? And there is an explanation, a very deep understanding of how, what is the role of the so-called National Security Advisor, and how he operates in relation to defense, in relation to interior, in relation to foreign ministry, in relation to government. Then we start the functional chapters, after covering the first three chapters as philosophical and kind of a teaching experience. we go for the chapters that covers the globe. The fourth chapter is the very difficult, tormenting American-Egyptian relationship. Many of you thought that Egypt is a stooge of the United States, a client state. The fact is, Egypt had a foreign policy, an independent, to a large extent, foreign policy, because no one is fully independent in the world, even the United States itself. There are constraints always, restraints always in conducting foreign policy. So I cover in 40 pages the very difficult relationship with the United States. Then comes chapter 5, the chapter on the expansion of the Security Council and the reform of the Security Council. And that is the chapter, I think. Why is it so? Because Egypt was feeling a certain weakness the last decade of President Mubarak's reign. And as we were feeling we were not strong enough in Africa, people were talking about expansion of the Security Council where Africa would receive or ask for 1 or 2 or 3 seats in the Security Council. 2 of them are permanent. So how would an Egyptian foreign minister ensure that Egypt gets 1 of them, while Africa, south of the Sahara, would get the 2nd? And the whole chapter is the war conducted to defend the Egyptian foreign policy and the Egyptian objectives aiming at acquiring a seat. Because if the Security Council was expanded then, at the time, 2005, without Egypt joining, maybe it would have had to wait for another 50 years for a further expansion, if ever, because the last expansion of the Security Council was 1964. The Security Council, as the United Nations was established in 1945, was composed of 11 member states, 5 permanent and 6 non-permanent. And people were aiming at enlarging to possibly 2021. So the 6 seats, who would get them? Is it Brazil? Is it Germany? Is it Japan? Is it India? Who else? Is it South Africa? Is it Egypt? Is it Nigeria? Who else? And that is a fascinating chapter for those who are interested in foreign policy. Then there is a chapter on water, Nile. Water, the Nile. How to defend the Egyptian interests vis-a-vis how to ensure that the quantity of water reaching the Egyptian borders remains as is, 55.5 billion cubic meter. At the time, there was no dam in South Africa and Ethiopia, and the Ethiopians were negotiating all the time with the Egyptians, but Egypt was insisting on a certain criteria for building or allowing the building of the dam. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said last month thanks to what we did to ourselves by creating the chaos we did in January 2011, allowing the Ethiopians to build the dam without caring even for Egyptian interests. Then comes a chapter on Sudan. I predicted then in 2005 that Sudan will be divided into two. Then a chapter on Africa, and Africa receives lots of attention there in the book because there has been lots of accusations, claims that Egypt was not paying enough interest or concern towards Africa. Not true at all. And the book covers lots of events that shows that, but it was the declining ability of Egypt to conduct a foreign policy similar to what China is doing in Africa, for instance. People were comparing Egypt with Africa, while the Egyptian program of technical assistance was $10 million. $10 million. While China was conducting a program of 5 billion with the B, billion dollars. So there is no way to compare Egypt with China. And sadly, the Egyptian populace or the journalists or those who are conducting themselves and focusing on Africa, they didn't know that the facts would show that we do not have the potential to compare ourselves with India, for instance. Then, chapters on Palestine and the peace process, chapters on relations with the rest of the world and how we wanted to create balance between Egypt and America, Egypt and the East, Egypt and China, Egypt and India. Then finally, there comes the last chapter on the last 45 days of my service to the Egyptian state and the tormentation of what had happened and the discussions within the Egyptian ruling authorities and how we were tackling and handling the 25th of January events. So that is the story of my testimony, Shahadtي. But I urge everyone who wants to read, you read the two books together. You cannot read one and say, well, I will postpone the other for next year. They have to be read together in order also to confuse yourself by where did I read this part, in what pages, in what book. As it happens often to me. I say whether did I write this event in this book or that book. But the two books are combined, the memoirs of an Egyptian civil servant who wanted very much to serve Egypt. Thank you very much.
Let me say, for the sake of my students attending here, and I'm very grateful to Mr. el-Gheit to come for a second time to AUC within 7 months and to come especially to the main campus to talk to AUC faculty and the students. Last time, he talked in Tahrir. And we wanted him to come here. Students are the leaders of the future, and I wanted them to listen to him. It's certainly a challenge to try to make a synthesis of Egyptian foreign policy in 25, 30 minutes. That second book, Shahadati, my testimony, is very rich, extremely rich. I urge everybody to read it. Mr. el-Gheit has been very modest about the contents of the book. The chapter on Africa, for instance, talks a lot about the competition to have a permanent membership in the Security Council for Africa. Who would be that country? Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa, and the competition between the three countries. There are lots of juicy aspects which we unfortunately miss in many memoirs. Mr. el-Gheit talks about thinking of suicide after the 1967 war. That is a war that affected lots of people of my generation. Briefly, the memoirs are not only important, which they should be, but enjoyable to read. You cannot actually, once you start, you cannot put the book aside. And I read the memoirs twice. I bought my own copy as soon as the book came out.
I sent you a copy too.
And then, Mr. el-Gheit was gracious enough to send me a copy, and I read the second copy. And the point is that you enjoy the reading for the second and third time.
He told me I left it in Canada. Yeah. So I told him, okay, I'll send you a new one.
So I almost know the two books now by heart, and I have my preferences for the volumes, for the chapters, for the pieces. As I said, lots of things you cannot understand present Egyptian foreign policy at present without reading these books. Even though Mr. el-Gheit finished in 2011. The water problem, the eternal Arab-Israeli conflict, the relations with the superpowers. He compared Egypt's status in Africa with China. These are issues that are continuing on and on and on and will continue. So the two volumes are key to Egyptian foreign policy. Without taking more time, I'll just open the floor now for questions, and I am sure that will give Ambassador el-Gheit the chance to give us some more information that the limited time we had for the lecture didn't allow him to do so. Dr. Kamal?
First of all, thank you, Dr. Bahgat, for organizing this important event and also for the invitation. And I would like also to thank the AUC for translating the second book, which is as important as the first book. As a professor of international relations and foreign policy, I would like to say that this is actually one of the best books written on Egyptian foreign policy. Secretary General el-Gheit knows that. I already told him that before. And I assigned many of his
No, but it is nice to
chapters.
repeat it, please.
Absolutely. I'm doing marketing for the book now. So I assigned many of the chapters of the book in the courses I teach, and it's must read for anyone who's interested in Egyptian foreign policy. It's not typical memoirs. It reflects vision, intellectual depth, and I would also say it's one of the few books that deal with the process of making Egyptian policy and who does who and so on. So highly recommended. Before Secretary General el-Gheit receives questions about specific topics, water, Arab-Israeli conflict, I want to ask him a question about a more broad issue related to also the making of Egyptian foreign policy, and specifically the role of ideas in making foreign policy. A few years ago, I invited a former Egyptian foreign minister to participate with me in the discussion of an MA thesis on ideas and foreign policy, and the case study was the impact of the neoconservatives in the US on making American foreign policy. And the argument of the former Egyptian foreign minister was, I don't believe in the role of ideas, I only believe on facts on the ground, realities on the ground. So my question actually to you is, to what extent ideas, and I don't want to say the word grand design, played an impact or a role in making Egyptian foreign policy? I mean, in the recent years. Thank you.
Take a few questions, and then I'll give Ambassador el-Gheit the chance to answer. There was somebody up there. Yes.
Dear Ambassador and dear Professor, I have a question. To what extent do you think Egyptians who are not specializing in politics and political science should involve in politics?
Can
To
you
what
repeat the question
extent do
slowly?
you think Egyptians who are not specializing in political science should be involved in politics and the political thought of the time?
My question to Secretary General, I talked about him a lot about this book. This book was conveyed as a message to people who are so-called intelligentsia, who were always accusing or criticizing the foreign affairs ministry policies during the last years of President Mubarak era. What was the real message you were trying to say to the so-called intelligentsia? You don't know, you didn't do the real effort to understand the real problems, you didn't do the real effort to gather the clear data. It was just a way to criticize anyone who was classified as a minister in Mubarak's era?
I think that is
Very
the first
good
round.
question.
And,
Very good question.
So you have the.
See, Dr. Kamal, how you conduct foreign policy. Conduct foreign policy aiming at defending Egyptian interest. Who characterizes, who frames the interest of the state of Egypt? It is, again, the historical experience, it is the geography, it is the heritage. This is our reaction to everything that happens around us. But contest between facts and ideas. My experience have taught me that 90% of the Egyptian action when it comes to foreign policy comes from people as young as this guy. Gamal Umoaf. He is 40 years old. He and all of them, they write their ideas. A wise superior or foreign minister, he receives the ideas, reacts to them. Are they logical? Could it be done? How to do it? In War and Peace, I was serving or working with a national security advisor by the name of Muhammad Hafiz Ismail General, a great guy. Egyptians should know the name very, very well. The equivalent of Ahmed Ismail Ali, the field marshal, a great Egyptian who served this state beyond the imagination of any of you. I was 32 years old. I write him an idea. He responds with a full page of challenging my idea. I receive an idea as foreign minister. I widen the scope of deepening the research, the study. If agreed, kind of a working group between foreign ministry, general intelligence, military intelligence, defense, interior. We sit and we discuss a working group. Then, if we feel that it is okay, it is sent to the president for his approval. It is a process. It is not just, well, I woke up early this morning, I decided to do so. Or that the Israelis did so, so we are acting by doing so. That is not the proper work of doing foreign policy or executing foreign policy. You have to study. You have to research. You have to weigh and in the books, I narrate lots of experiences of someone suggesting a stupid idea. If I would have reacted as foreign minister or the president who have reacted to such a stupid idea, we would have been in war 10 times within 5 weeks. So foreign policy is a responsibility. Responsible. Comes the idea of how far the interested sort of follower of foreign policy to be engaged. I, for one, as foreign minister, used to invite people a lot from universities, from academia, from media. Everybody who would show interest, I would invite him for a discussion on this or that subject. And I came to discover and to value lots of such people. And at the same time, I came to discover how many amongst those so-called experts, they don't know anything about the subject they are talking about. And because of this, I respond to the third question of Ahmed. Many were firing on Mubarak and his foreign minister and the foreign ministry and on Egyptian behavior for the sake of we are angry. But when you deepen your knowledge and really be a kind of balanced in judgment, you would discover that things were, the Hezbollah fights Israel. So the Egyptian left wants to engage Egypt in a war against Israel for the sake of an Iranian proxy. Why would we do so? Or Hamas fights against Israel, being encouraged by Iran, and there are those who want Egypt to throw away the Egyptian-Israeli treaty and to engage in war, and to have our youth, young people, staying in the Egyptian army for 8 years, as we did in '67. So there are certain responsible behavior that has always to be weighed by a responsible minister.
We'll take a second round. Kariman.
Hello.
That is a nice name, Kariman.
Thank you. That's a nice name, Ahmed Abou el-Gheit.
One of students in
I think 25 يناير had more disadvantages than advantage on Egypt.
Had advantages.
More disadvantage than advantage on Egypt.
Kariman, let me answer this now, better now. Kariman, in Egypt, in January 2011, we needed change. It was imperative to have change. And change in a course that would ensure that this state and this country and this nation, as it moves to a better setting, it has to be orderly. It has to be done with vision. Those who went Tahrir had no leadership, had no vision. And that allowed the Muslim Brothers to take over. And the Muslim Brothers, and I insist, wanted to take back Egypt to the 15th century. And sadly, they were supported by the Western world. The Muslim Brothers and their ideology were supported by the Western world. And I have seen, as foreign minister, many of the Western ministers visiting this country in January, February, and March 2011, thinking that now it will turn into Switzerland. They didn't know anything, and in the book, I narrate discussions with Condi Rice, saying, do this, do that. And I tell her, be careful. They thought that the Muslim Brothers were Erdogan. Both are alike. So change was needed, but it had to be orderly. It was not. And the ramifications of what had happened, we see in many developments that were not necessarily to take place in this country. One of them is wasting at least $40 to $45 billion, the Egyptian reserve. And he who challenges this, I can give him the figures. We wasted the money. And we allowed our interests in the waters Nile to be affected, and lots of other things. On the other hand, we needed to change. But up till this moment, we are not changing. We want to repeat the cycle again stupidly. We want to repeat the cycle again. Let's change ourselves. As Egyptians, let's change ourselves. Let's be cleaner, more dedicated, more responsible. I often think of all of you driving from Cairo, the center of Cairo, or from the suburbs, coming to this campus. And I fear for you. You know why? Because of the traffic, the way we drive as Egyptians. The way you drive, and he drives, and all of us, we have to conduct ourselves. Change. So what is needed for Egypt is change for the better, not to the 15th century.
Wonderful, Azim.
General, of course, we go back a long way, and we have a chapter
How many times did you interview me?
7, 9, 8, 10 probably, but I remember that you have written part of our last interview in your book, which was very important document.
She comes to me on the 8th of February or 7th of February, 2011. And she says, I'd like to interview you. Okay. And she says, what do you think? What are the reasons behind what's happening in Tahrir? And I give her 4 or 5 reasons. Off my head, just like that, such and such and such, and I narrate them in the book. And it is, the interview is made at night, at 8 o'clock at night. And my wife says, and are you still functioning as a foreign minister? And I was stating the facts, the results of the Egyptian elections, the advanced age of the president, the many reasons.
I remember telling this to Ahmed Aiz, because Ahmed Aiz, I had his interview the same day that we were interviewed. And I told him what you said, and he couldn't believe it. Because you said that during Mubarak's era, he did not, it was before 11th of February, and I remember this was very frank. For the first time, somebody from the cabinet working as close to President Mubarak and saying all this. You've stated facts, you've stated all the facts in both of your books, but now after 2019, you've become the Secretary General of the Arab League, and you've seen many developments, whether here or in the Arab world. Going back then, personally, could you have changed anything from your diplomacy, from Egyptian diplomacy, that could have avoided, like the Ethiopian crisis now? Yes, President Sisi said that because of 2011, Ethiopia took advantage of this havoc here coming, and going ahead with this dam. Could you have changed anything in your policies that could have reflected positively now?
I would say I wouldn't have changed anything. But I should have, but not myself, the Egyptian state should have defended its position media-wise, more energetic, attractive manner. 2006, the Egyptian population, sadly, joined Hezbollah against the Egyptian state. 2008, 2009, the Egyptian population joined Hamas against the interest of Egypt. We did not manage, and that is not the responsibility of the foreign minister, because I was speaking every night for 45 minutes, 50 minutes, explaining Egyptian position. It comes in Egyptian TV, on Egyptian TV, 5 minutes, 7 minutes. So if we would have exerted enough to explain, to show, to single out what are the objectives. Though I kept saying to people, this is not for your interest. Someone is playing havoc with your minds. Nobody accepted, because people, anybody who challenges Israel is my hero. Okay. What about my bread and butter? What about Egyptian interest? Egypt come paramount. The Hamas destroys the Egyptian-Palestinian fence. There is a fence. They destroy it. And 300,000 Palestinians enter Egyptian territory. And I say, after rebuilding the fence, he who will venture to destroy the fence again, we will break his leg. And Egyptians were angry. How dare you? This territory and this land is sacred. And if you want to enter, you enter from the door, not from the window. Land is sacred, and no cause whatsoever is higher than Egyptian territory. This is the way I have been raised. Egypt first, nothing else.
Aida?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your talk. My name is Aida Yahya. I'm an assistant lecturer at the British University in Egypt, and I'm a student of Professor Korani. I'm very glad that you brought the issue of the Nile crisis up several times. So I see that it is a real threat rather than a securitized issue or a creation of the securitizing actors. In your opinion, what is the role of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in order to help to resolve this crisis? Thank you.
You have to understand that it is a technical and political issue. And the Foreign Ministry has, or had, because I shouldn't be talking about Egyptian Foreign Ministry now. It is not my responsibility. But we always had a section on the Nile. And we had always experts on the Nile waters. We always, in the Foreign Ministry, maintain, and often our diplomats not only are researchers on the subject, and they have joined foreign universities aiming at the subject, and they know it by the palm of the hand. However, it is also a technical issue. The Ministry of Irrigation, And it is an issue related to the Egyptian state, to all the pillars of government and decision-making in Egypt. So it is not limited to, the responsibility is not limited to this or that organization. It is holistic responsibility.
I have just a last question up there, very much at the end. Yes. And then I'll give you the floor too.
Much for being here. What you just said now, the precious, sacred. Is this taught in the military academies?
Can you please stand up and bring the microphone closer?
President Mubarak know about this? And is this taught in the military academies?
The book or the two books we or I write, the whole book, this book is totally dedicated to regaining the land of Egypt from Israel by war. So the Egyptian army and the Egyptian military academies everywhere are not only taught, it is planted in their soul and minds that nothing exceeds nothing. Even life itself doesn't exceed the responsibility to defend. And it isn't only limited to the Egyptian. You read about the French in the First World War, or the Russians in the Second World War. Armies are made, and officer corps is sort of created to defend lands. Land is life. You have land and water, that is life. The story of the crossing of, or the intrusion on Egyptian territory from Gaza is stated in this book, and the whole story is there. I received a call from President Mubarak sometime in February or early March February 2008, and he says, what do you have? And I tell him, President, I have news that are not making me uneasy. What is happening? I tell him the Palestinians have crossed into Egypt in the hundreds of thousands. What? Yes, 300,000 people crossed this morning. He says, but somebody else told me 30,000. No, 300,000 plus. Where do you get your information from? I get it from the United Nations, UNRWA, because UNRWA is based in Palestine and Gaza, and they know exactly what is happening in the sector, in the Gaza Strip. So he says, okay, tomorrow you have a meeting. That was evening at 8 o'clock at night. Tomorrow morning, very early, you have a meeting with such and such and such and such, and offer me a report with ideas and recommendations. Following day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, what is happening? Tell him 700,000 crossed and crossed back. 700,000 people. Then were kindly quietly pushed back by the disciplined Egyptian military, disciplined, though some of them were killed. And as they were pushed back and the Egyptian territory was, so we erected again the wall, or the fence. The wall, it is a wall. Then comes March 2009, a year after the first event. There are signals that they want again to repeat the intrusion on Egyptian territory. There I tell him, issue a warning. The warning was he who would venture to cross by force, by demolishing Egyptian facilities, we will just break his leg. I'm not. And 10 years after, I'm not.
It should be added that it's sacred because Moses came here and Jesus came here.
No, it is sacred because it is Egypt.
Okay. Just last question now. That student there. Last question. And please be brief because we have just gone over time. Okay.
Ambassador el-Gheit, I'd like to thank you for documenting such an important part of Egyptian history. Question, Ambassador, you were the Egyptian foreign minister from 2004 to 2011. During this time, there were a lot of accusations about Dr. Ashraf Marwan. I was curious to know exactly how the ministry dealt with those accusations.
I also, in the book, I recount the story of, sadly, how I was informed by ambassador in Britain of passing away of you are asking about my belief all honesty, I was told by President Mubarak himself that President Sadat told him when he was vice president, you know, I was using Ashraf, feeding him information, asking him to convey to the Israelis to deceive them. Ashraf Marwan was an Egyptian nationalist.
Just a minute. I mean, that is a topic that we can have a lecture about. Huge debate. But it is important to register Mr. el-Gheit's view about that. That is important in itself. I want just to conclude because time is running out and say that excellent talk does not replace the need to read the two volumes. They are different. They are as rich. You have seen informative, of course, like all memoirs, but you have seen two things that are unusual in these memoirs. And I share Dr. Kamal's view absolutely about the distinctiveness of these memoirs. We didn't consult, but we reached the same point of view. Personal tone that makes it interesting to read. Anecdotes are not wasted. They come to back up information. Recipe for lots of people, including for students, how to advance your career. These two elements that you don't expect in memoirs were clear in the talk. natural that comes from a distinguished speaker. You have seen that Mr. el-Gheit not only speaks well, but also writes well. The book is very, very rich. The talk is also, despite the brief aspect, very informative. I just want to end by saying two things. During my years at AUC, I repeat, I haven't seen a speaker invited to come twice to speak at AUC.
May
number
I
one.
make an
Number
intervention,
two.
Doctor?
Number two, the fact that Mr. el-Gheit found the time to come to the new campus, to speak to our faculty and our students. Tahrir is very important for VIPs. I call it the elite. We are here, the masses, and I'm glad that he came to us and talked to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. But may I make one slight intervention, since the British ambassador is sitting amongst us? I want to say that this book, War and Peace, Witness to War and Peace, there is an episode when the Americans and the British were trying to achieve a ceasefire. Comes Russian ambassador by the name of he calls President Sadat at night, 12 o'clock, and he says, well, President, it came to the attention of Moscow that if you would accept a ceasefire on the current lines, the Israelis would agree. Slight push that to now it is time to end the military confrontation. That says no. Without coordination with the Russians comes excellent, experienced British ambassador at 4 o'clock in the morning. Calls the presidency. We are working 24 hours. I was there. He wants to see the president at once, 4 o'clock in the morning. So again, he meets him. Someone told me he met him in his pajamas. And he made the same, more or less, the offer, and the president said no. That ambassador is the father of this great ambassador.
On this juicy note, then, I want, in your name, to thank very much Mr. Ahmed el-Gheit and hope that he comes again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.